Good morning, class. Today we are going to talk about chapter 12. When it comes to talking about value, we're really talking about light and dark. Value is simply the design term for light and dark. If we take a look at this example here with a gray scale, it's actually an achromatic grayscale, meaning there's no color. If you look at the center, where the circle is, we are looking at the same color within each square. But due to its surroundings, we can say that the color in the center is very influenced by its surroundings. When we are talking about the relationship between areas of dark and light, we're talking about value contrast. The average eye can discern about 40 different variations in value, seen as different grays. Low value contrast describes the difference between any two areas next to each other that are slight. If we take a look at this black and white photograph by R.D. Nelson, double frame Diana, number 2103, we are looking at these darks and these lights, and with these contrasts we're able to create and distinguish form. We also like to use value as a way to create emphasis. And if you look at this work here, Ferdinand Boll, Holy Family in an Interior, 1643. And this work is an etching, dry point and engraving. So it's a type of printmaking. You can tell that it is etching just from the quality of the surface. First, we are looking at these hatch marks created by these carvings into the original surface material. And if you look at the overall composition, there is a hint of gray, a gray smoky type of appearance, and that is caused by the burning of the acid in this type of process of printmaking. And we are going to ask ourselves about this composition here. Note where Boll places the values. Do they run the scale from black to white? Where are the values weighted? So in order for an artist to use contrast to create emphasis, the artist doesn't exactly just go directly from light to dark. Instead, the fluctuations have to be a little bit more drastic. And so there's a relationship between value and color. Value and color are related. Every color has a value. If you remove the color, you get a gray value. A pure yellow is a light or high value color, which would correspond to a light gray. Purple is a low value color that would match a much darker gray on the grayscale. So if you can imagine, if you were to look at a rainbow and how we would assume that there is a sequence of colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo. If we were to remove the saturation of that color, if we were to remove the hue, then we would be left with a gray value. So the yellow, you can assume is a very high value, a very light gray. Colors such as a blue would most likely be a darker gray. And if we look at these examples here, even though the image on the right has color on it, we can imagine removing the color from this image. If we were to remove the color from the right side, it would look very much like the left side. And notice that the green that was very noticeable on the right side isn't as noticeable as that area on the left side. So that that green is very close to that gray color right behind it, the gray in the negative space. You'll notice that the orange on the right side makes a lighter gray. If you were to remove that color, you can see that on the left side. If you were to look at the lower right-hand corner of the right image, it's red, but if you look at that without its color on the left, it just blends right into the rest of the grays. So that green, as that turns into a gray, is very similar to the red as that turns gray. And if we take a look at this work here, a famous painting by Geneleschi, very famous female artist from the Baroque period. She paints in color. This is a black and white version of her original painting. When it comes to the Baroque pieces, they are almost painting in black and white because they're exaggerating these strong contrasts. The darks are usually very, very dark, almost a black. On the other side, the very light areas are almost just a white. So the artist paints and adds value to give the shape volume. And this work is called Judith Decapitating Holofernes, a very famous scene in the Old Testament. If you take a look at this example here, and this too has a very strong contrasting color, especially with the darks and lights. It's almost as though the original image is just black and white with just hints of color. If you look at the focal point, you could probably say it is the fish in the center because of the vividness of the color, some of the lightest parts of the whole image is on the fish. There's a lot of details. So all of these qualities bring the object forward. And if you think about the negative space, you'll notice that the artist puts a contrasting color behind it to bring this object in the foreground even closer to us. So not only is the background supposed to appear further away from us, it's also darker, and that enhances this believability of depth. And this painting is actually watercolor. Winslow Homer, Leaping Trout, 1881. So the artist purposely using contrast to create emphasis. And so if we were to experiment with value and contrast, imagine the same image, and we are looking at one here. One image that appears to be of one day or one condition while the other one changes. So in the first image, the left side, the sycamore stick is placed on the snow, raining heavily. On the next image, it's the next day where the bark stripped and we are seeing what was left over after the rain. And here is another example of color or the lack of color in a grayscale image. And right away, it looks like toilet paper. I wonder what it is. Sue Hetmansberger, Untitled Drawing, 1975. Watercolor and pencil. And so one of the most important uses of gradations of dark and light is to suggest volume or space. So the artist uses value to create a more believable space. And this is an example of chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro, coined during the Renaissance from the Italian words meaning light and dark, refers to the artistic device that uses light and dark to imply depth and volume. Value can be used to create volume. So if you see a work of art that is darks and lights, we like to call that a chiaroscuro style of work. Okay, and now we are looking at another image. Is this a photograph where the artist focuses on the darks and the lights and some of these very interesting shapes. Not only that, but there's strong uses of color, especially with the bright oranges and yellows. And so this work actually has many things going on in terms of its value. We can also see this hint of atmospheric perspective, this idea that the objects that are further in the distance are less in terms of their contrast. They are almost grayed out. They're blending right into that negative space. You can probably say that atmospheric perspective is caused by things like moisture, fog, pollution, dust. So it gives us a very strong indication of how far these objects are. And here is a work that looks similar to a painting that we probably looked at in the beginning of the semester. I'm actually just looking at the text. At first glance, I am thinking Basquiat, but it does not look like a Basquiat painting at all, because he actually used Charlie Parker in one of his own works, and he's a very famous jazz musician. Charlie Parker watches his hotel room burn. Some really interesting things happening in this image. Looks like the man is on his bed. Looks like he used a drug of some sort. There's also alcohol on the side table, an ashtray, and a lamp. And if you look at the window in the background, the artist creates these lines of lights that perhaps indicate fire. And this work is by Sue Coe. Charlie Parker watches his hotel room burn, 1984. And this is an etching. And when it comes to value, we can say that it can play a big part in the physical and the psychological space of a work of art. Value can create zones of lightness and darkness. Value can create literal difference in spaces such as two or more contrasting parts. Value usage can form a feeling or sense of space that carries psychological weight. If you look at where some of the darker areas are here, they definitely have a different feeling in comparison to the areas where there is light. And if we take a look at this example here, a portrait, very strong contrasting black and whites. Value is also used in shading. Something about that. It creates visual interest. Each medium has a different technique for shading. Experiment to find what you like. And this is actually graphite on paper, so a basic drawing on paper. 1973, Walter Hotkey. And let's take a look at this work here. The values are still somewhat monochromatic. We are looking at variations of beige or brown. Some really interesting expressive line qualities, especially with the hatching and the highlighted areas. I really enjoy looking at the values being created with these expressive hatch marks. And this work is by Giovanni Domenico Tiepolo, Saint Ambrose addressing the young Saint Augustine, 1747 to 1750. And the artist here uses different techniques to create value. Cross-hatching, the wash drawing. A wash is when the artist uses ink but adds a lot of water, a lot of the vehicle into the water so that it can easily spread out, and it also lightens that value. And so the artist here uses mixed media. In other words, uses different materials, black chalk, pen, brown ink with brown wash on paper. And now let's take a look at this work here. It looks like a type of digitally enhanced image of blacks and whites. And the blacks and whites, these variations of grays, look exaggerated or enhanced by pattern. Using dots as a medium to create varying shades of gray as an artistic statement. Interesting. So this is an example of halftones. Halftones are made by primarily black and whites. You'll see this in newspapers, books, magazines. And this is a spread from a catalog featuring fashion by R. Newbold, a Paul Smith subsidiary, autumn, winter 1996. Okay? And that's it for this chapter. I hope you liked some of the artwork here. I like a lot of black and white works of art. So I'm hoping that this can help you when it comes to your project. Maybe you can play around with value when it comes to creating a particular face of at least one of your paintings. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this chapter. Thanks for listening.